Good morning to you all, and welcome to this next session that I'm chairing. My name is Keith Ditcham. I'm the Acting Director of the Organised Crime and Policing Research Group at RUSI. I've been at RUSI 3 years and I've spent more time doing acting than not, but there we go. I apologise if hopefully I won't let you guys down and start to nod off, but I have flown in this morning with a colleague from a trip to the Caribbean, so there's no sympathy in the room for me, I get that. But we've been looking at the cocaine threat update for a research project we have for the Home Office, so very interesting trip. But if I don't see an airport or a flight again for a few months, it really wouldn't bother me. I think both Genevieve, my colleague, and I have had enough of travel for the time being. But so that's who I am. I'm ex-National Crime Agency, ex-police, and I've lived and worked overseas for most of my career, worked internationally, living in the Netherlands, Spain, and also in Colombia. And most of that work has been around the organised crime threat that comes particularly from Latin America. And as you heard earlier today, that's not exclusively, but it does focus on the cocaine trade. So let me introduce, if I may, please, a very distinguished panel. So to my left, we have Dr. Annette Idler, so thank you, Director of Global Security Programme at Oxford University. And then next to Dr. Annette, we have Martin Verrier, who I know very well. He's one of our associate fellows, but also Martin was a former Deputy Secretary for Drug Enforcement for the government of Argentina. And he's worked on some of our European funded projects around global illicit flows as well. Next to him, Dr. Diarella Islas, former Deputy Director of Research at the Ministry of Security and Citizen Protection, Government of Mexico. Welcome. And then lastly, but by no means least, Antonio Sampaio, hopefully I've pronounced that, thank you, Senior Analyst for the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, or GTOC as some people know it as. So welcome you all, and also to the audience as well. Thank you very much for your participation today, and I'm looking forward to a very lively discussion. We shall run for about an hour and 10 minutes, and then I think rumbling stomachs and lunch will probably beckon, and if I get the impression that you're more interested in that than what we have to say, then I'll call it to halt. But let me just start then. Firstly, please, we're looking at cross-border security, the criminal markets, weapons and drug trafficking, and asking the question, how can Latin American states more effectively combat transnational organised crime? And so first off, let me ask you, Dr. Annette, if I may, please. So from your working that you conducted on the Colombian-Venezuela border, how do you evaluate the recent rapprochement of governments, and what effects have you seen in relation to cross-border security issues?
Right. So thank you so much. Thanks also to RUSI for inviting me, for having me on the panel. I think it's very important that we see the re-establishment, if you want, of bilateral relations. I mean, mainly for 3 reasons that are important to cross-border security. First of all, we think about people-centered security, what's happening right at the border. The border has been closed for a really long time, which means that people are, of course, still crossing. The border is very porous. However, people had to cross through the trochas, the informal trails, which was basically a way of taking advantage of people by criminal groups. People have been abused. Criminals have been using that also for bribes. Now, with the reopening, I mean, it was a gradual process that started in September, went on until January right now. We have the formal border crossings, which doesn't mean that we don't see any exploitation at all, but it is becoming easier again for people, and especially Venezuelan migrants or refugees who cross over to Colombia don't see the same kind of risks that they had before. Then also at the national level, in terms of national security, I do think it's important, because we have to remember that in that border area, it's one of the strongholds of the ELN, the National Liberation Army, the Colombian rebel group. And that group is present on both sides of the border. So the Colombian government is in a peace process with the ELN. They've started the talks in Caracas last year. They had just now in January another emergency meeting around a controversy around the ceasefire. But basically the fact that these groups are present, or that group is particularly present on both sides, means that without Venezuela having a role, it will be impossible to actually reach something in that process. So having them both involved, engaged is important. It doesn't mean that we'll solve everything right away, but it's at least a step into the right direction for national security, if you want. But then also at the global level, I do think that this border matters a lot. And that's because it's, of course, only a starting point. So if we think about all the illicit flows that cross both ways, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, human trafficking, gasoline smuggling, all of that originates in that area, because in that border area, there's coca cultivation, for example, laboratories to process coca into cocaine, but it's also the starting point of international routes via West Africa to Europe, to the UK, via the Caribbean to the United States. So by having better cooperation between Colombia and Venezuela, ultimately it would be a first step to also changing something at the global level.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And perhaps in the sort of questions people might want to ask, how effective that sort of cooperation is, in particular with the government of Venezuela at this particular moment in time. But Martin, if I could come to you, please. So, and the question for you: what factors explain drug traffickers and other transnational crime organizations finding safe haven in the Southern Cone?
Yeah, well, when we think about it, and when you really think about what makes a country more insecure than the others, you can identify at least, I would say, 4 main drivers. And these same drivers explain why do these criminal organizations operate in the region. The first one is obviously the situation regarding the socioeconomic situation in those countries. So this, in a way, works as an enabler for organized crime to develop. They can get access to a lot of workforce or labor for their activities. But then you also have other drivers, as the lack of education, of opportunities, also some cultural drivers that are also linked to this. And in addition to that, hugely availability of firearms and the fact that drugs are actually manufactured, especially cocaine and cannabis in the region. So regarding this last driver, drugs not only in a way explain that the fact that they are produced in South America explain why these criminal organizations choose to operate there, but it also drives a lot of violence and criminality. So, for example, just to give you some figures, Argentina currently has a homicide rate of around 4 per 100,000 inhabitants. But then when you see specific cities in Argentina, like Rosario, where this criminality linked to drugs is very active, then the crime rate is almost 6-fold that figure. So it's actually 22 per 100,000 inhabitants. And you can see this dynamic in all South America. And this leads us to another situation where, okay, how much criminality enables or is linked to political interests, and how much do they penetrate? So this is a dual relationship that also explains why are so strong in our continent. So it is not only that they're willing and wishing and capable on penetrating the governments, but also that in many cases and in many places, governments, local and federal, are willing to adopt them as allies, as a partners in crime. We are talking about a region where the US has already found 3 former presidents, or has identified them as significant corrupt, one of them in South America. So this is a huge problem over there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin. And again, that's in question. We can pick up issues around corruption and how that facilitates the trade. But also a question that I'd like to ask you to think about as well is, and certainly when I've been in Colombia, is the Colombians will argue that they're doing what they can to tackle the trafficking, but they also ask the question of the UK in particular, but Europe, as to what we're doing about reducing the demand as well. But perhaps we can come back around to that if there's time. Dr. Diorella, welcome again. The question about Mexico: is Mexico's policing reform a viable solution to its security problem?
Well, first,
Big
thank
question.
you. Yeah, I know. Well, I thank RUSI for inviting me here today. And well, speaking about the reforms in Mexico is a very complex issue, because the fact that we have reforms, it doesn't mean that they are going to work. Reforms work only when people work. So Mexico has advanced their policies in a very well, robust manner. We have specific issues like the requirement for policemen and all security personnel to be trained. And if you go to Mexico and you're part of the federal government, you will have to your advantage a set of platforms, including from the United Nations, that you can take advantage in terms of gender, human security, human rights, no discrimination courses. What people do with that, that's the real issue that we should be seeing. The reforms, they are constructed with the aid of the UNDP, the UNODC, our partners in different countries, including the United States and some partners in Latin America. What now we need to be observing is how well they are going to be applied. So in terms of the reforms and the policing, I think, or my answer would be, they are being carried out in a very interesting and well-planned manner. And now the next step is to observe how well they are implemented by the people. First in the federal government, which is being implemented because they are required to implement it. If you are, as I was part of the federal government, you were required by law to complete certain amount of hours of training in different areas: gender equality, human security, legal frameworks, human rights. That's one part. And then we have the local part, which is the local governments in each state, and then the municipal governments in each state. Even when the federal government has all these advantages and the local governments need to implement them, the implementation in the local part and in the municipal part can be different from the federal government. So we are all working a different piece. So that's my answer. We have good policies, then we are applying them, and the implementation of each policy has to do with each state and each municipality.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And I do hope someone in the audience asks the question, how realistic is Narcos Mexico on Netflix? I don't know if you've seen it at all, but we'll see whether that comes up. Good. And Antonio, please, if I may. What should be President Lula da Silva's and the local authorities' main actions to help counter organized crime rooted in its major cities?
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, RUSI, for the invitation. In a way, President Lula started his administration on with some positive, encouraging first steps in public security. But at the same time, those very steps, I fear, will provide a distraction from tackling organized crime in cities, especially when we talk about the sort of gangs and governance dynamics in informal settlements that drive urban violence and extreme urban violence in many Brazilian cities. So let me explain. President Lula has spoken something that is rare in Brazilian politics for a president to set such specific security policies right at the start of his mandate. He has set environmental crime, something that featured here in the previous session, as a priority, very correctly. We all know that the Amazon and the environmental protection, all Brazilian biomes, but especially in the Amazon, has been a problem in the previous administration of Jair Bolsonaro. And President Lula has signed a decree strengthening the organization called IBAMA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, which has been, since the Fernando Henrique Cardoso administration in the 90s, extremely capable. It's an international reference in terms of combating crime in the Amazon. But of course, it also has tremendous challenges because of the size of the Amazon and the fact that resources are limited to fight that crime in the Amazon. So strengthening IBAMA has been a positive step, and also he has withdrawn or altered some measures to fight from Bolsonaro to encourage mining in the Amazon. So illegal mining and the environmental impacts of mining are also a problem, and legislation that fights that is encouraging. And finally, there's also the issue of availability of weapons, of arms, that has been probably the most important sort of element that Bolsonaro did. His greatest impact on public security in Brazil has been to greatly encourage or to legislate taking out many of the measures that prevent people from owning or bearing arms. So making it easier for the general population to bear arms. So Bolsonaro supporters think that that's a good thing. And of course, the consensus among the expert community and in Brazil, and also a great part of the society, is that facilitates the access to weapons to criminal groups. Now, he has set his political agenda, his security policy agenda, which is great, and something that is difficult to see in previous administrations, the same set of specific policies and goals. However, he has his hands full, and there is a huge problem in Brazilian cities, and I think your question was related more to that than to the western borders of Brazil, that I'm not sure he will have the time, the resources, and the policy commitment to resolve, which has to do with, our colleagues were talking about reforming the police, tackling the governance issue in urban areas, the fact that Brazilian police and security policies in general have consisted of basically a criminal justice repressive policy and not tackling the governance, the severe problems in terms of governance and service provision and social development, especially in informal settlements in the slums. The federal government has an important role in coordinating and amplifying local measures and making sure that crime doesn't migrate from one area to the other, and providing resources and knowledge for local governments and state governments to do that. And it's not doing that. And I'm not sure that Lula has signaled the intention to do that. He hasn't, but also that he will have, with so many other priorities in reversing the problematic measures from the Bolsonaro administration, that he will have the commitment to tackle urban violence.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, having traveled to Brazil and seen for myself the favelas and the sort of places where some people are forced to live, and the power of the organizations that exist in places where the state is weak, it's easy to see how that organized crime thrives. So hopefully we'll be able to tease some of that out. Dr. Annette, I'm coming back to you again, if I may, please. And I did sort of hint at this, I suppose, gave the secret away slightly when I commented on your earlier answer. But so, in your opinion, can the security forces of Colombia and Venezuela realistically collaborate together, given the differences in the political regimes?
Right. Well, I mean, it is, of course, a question that can't be just answered black and white. I think one thing that we need to consider is, of course, the change in government in Colombia last year. With Petro, a lot changed, and Maduro immediately announced that there would be more of collaboration. He also announced that even the border posts of the Venezuelan armed forces, that they would be in contact with the Colombian police and the military, partly to support what Colombia has announced as a total peace. So Petro has announced that he would he would negotiate with armed groups, with non-state actors. That includes both the ELN and also criminal groups. And Maduro said that Venezuela would be supportive of that. So that, first of all, of course, is positive to see that there is exchange, that there is contact, something that hasn't happened before. And that's particularly important in the current tense situation that we're seeing at the border. Just thinking back of 2021, and there were clashes between FARC dissidents and the Venezuelan armed forces on the Venezuelan side of the border, which led to lots of Venezuelans crossing the border into Arauca on the Colombian side of the border. It was a humanitarian crisis, in addition to the humanitarian crisis that already exists in the region. But it was also a moment that was very tense in terms of the relations between the armed forces of both countries. And any, I would say, escalation by mistake could have happened in that moment because of the lack of exchange of intelligence, the lack of engagement on both sides. So having that at least to some extent now reestablished or in the process of being reestablished, is quite important just to avoid that kind of escalation by mistake. It doesn't necessarily mean that we'll see immediate results. I mean, we also all know that one problem is not just the political regimes, it's also the will, it's also to what extent actually the national level has an influence on what happens at the local and at the regional level. Corruption, of course, is another issue, but at least it builds more confidence between both sides, which is the starting point to do anything about the cross-border violence. I would also add to that because everything is really happening across the border, so we need to think about the border area not as a border line where one country ends on one side and then the other one starts the other side. It's really, I call it in my book, the transnational borderland lens, right? Where everything is happening across the border, that you can't achieve anything without having that collaboration. And that's basically due to three factors that the armed groups are taking advantage of. One is the weak state governance in those areas. So in terms of infrastructure, it's really, really hard to have presence from civilian institutions in the border areas. Whereas the criminal groups, the armed groups, they're just crossing back and forth. Another point is what I call the low risk, high opportunity environment in terms of the illicit economic activities. Because the border is so porous, it's very easy to cross back and forth, to engage in trafficking, in smuggling. And of course, that brings a lot of profit, attracts a lot of groups to be present in that area, but using violence, of course, to pursue their goals. And the third one is the propensity to impunity in that area because of the historical lack or deficient cooperation between security forces. So it's in a way a filter mechanism. The border acts as a filter mechanism whereby the non-state groups can cross back and forth, whereas law enforcement stops at the borderline. So going back to the initial question, to what extent does the political regime matter? Yes, of course, it does matter, but we've seen a change in government at the Colombian side. So having that exchange, having the confidence building measures is definitely a step into the right direction.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. And encouraging to hear that there is some cooperation because, as you know, Venezuela is somewhat isolated in the international arena as well. Martin, back to you if I may, please. So policy failures and successes that have been particularly critical for Argentina in light of countering illegal markets and its associated violence, if you will, please.
Okay, I will have to, in a way, auto-reference to my own tenure in the government. So I will tell you what really worked for us and where we failed during those 4 years. So I served in the Ministry of Security from 2015 until 2019. And the first thing we realized was that obviously we were facing a threat that was not just a regular criminal threat. So we realized this was a criminal economy that we had to tackle. So in that sense, we found a very useful way in which we developed a strategy using Professor Albanese from the US framework. And Professor Albanese says, okay, for any successful business to work, you need 4 crucial elements, again, to work for that business to be successful. So the first one is you need something to sell or a service to provide. In the second place, that business would eventually work in an environment. So if you want to put a supermarket, you will have in a city like London, you will need authorization from the government, from the council, tax agencies, or whatever. So this is the second pillar. The third pillar would be you need a demand. So if nobody's buying your stuff or your services, then your business would eventually fail. And the fourth one is you have to have freedom to use the benefits, the profit from your economic activity. So when we thought about the criminal enterprise, we developed our strategy using these 4 pillars. So we developed a strategy on tackling the supply of mainly of drugs. And I have to mention that this was the #1 priority for the administration back then. So when I was hearing about some of the the policies that we should tackle together with Europe and Latin America. In a way, I thought, I felt that there was like a gap between what we need in Latin America and what many European governments think we do need. So before, for example, climate change and everything, in many places in Latin America, we are even fighting for our own existence against organized crime. So, but let me go back to the strategy. So the first pillar was to tackle the supply of drugs, and we divided the strategy in 3 levels. The first one, obviously, reinforcing the borders, which are totally fluid, but still there's a lot of things you can do. So we use mostly strategic intelligence to identify the main routes, the main patterns, methodologies. And the second level was to tackle the trafficking in the main routes being used. So we used a lot of intelligence to identify who were the organizations interlinked and responsible for this trafficking. And for your knowledge, in general, it is not the same organization, the one who sells the stuff on the border and the one who puts that drugs on the ships to Europe. So there are at least 6, 7 different organizations involved in each of the operations. And finally, we found that the approach to the places where organized crime was entangled was in a way controlling the territory, require a multi-agency approach. So this involved another program, which would be, would take me a lot of time to explain, but it involved the compromise of infrastructure, education, obviously pacification previous to that. But there was the first pillar. The second pillar, obviously, was to change the environment. So we increased significantly the quantity of substances under control, and we ended having a new legal system in which we would list drugs by chemical family. So a generic, as they say, a generic listing project. That project is still available online at UNODC if any other country needs to do it. We did that with the Ministry of Science in Argentina, but we also increased a lot of our cooperation internationally. So we developed the first task forces with the European Union, with the US. We exchanged a lot of criminal intelligence with other countries. So we made the operations with Canada, with the US, with the UK, even with Russia also. So a lot of international cooperation. This is one of the reasons why events like these are so important for this community. And also we increase cooperation inside Argentina. Argentina is a federal country. You have 24 police forces and 4 federal agencies. So there was a lot of work in arranging that. The third pillar regarding the demand and in drugs is very important. This is a two-sided coin. And in that sense, we work a lot with the agency in charge of the attention to drug addicts and prevention strategies. And we developed an early warning system. So during the first month of my tenure, we had a case during an electronic music concert where several kids died during that night. And we realized that the Ministry of Security, got acquainted of the case 4 or 5 hours after the incident happened. So we realized we were lacking an immediate alert system. And we worked this with Cedronar, which is the drug demand agency in Argentina. And finally, obviously, the profits. And this is probably the most important strategy when you fight the drugs is the missile that you have to shoot under the floating line and will be the most important one, because we've seen a lot how money laundering works, not only in benefiting organized crime, but also working as a criminal convergence enabler for other criminal activities to happen. So, for example, we had a case in which Hezbollah in the Tribord area was actually financing their activities through the laundering money in the area, in Argentina, in Brazil, in Paraguay, and being involved in other criminal activities as drug trafficking and trafficking in arms. So the fourth pillar, which was oriented towards tackling the profits, we work a lot with our financial unit, which was the government gave the financial unit extended powers to investigate this, and we built integrated task forces between the federal law enforcement agencies and the financial unit in Argentina. So the results were that we increased significantly the quantity of drugs seized, and simultaneously we saw immediately how crime rates dropped in Argentina. So we proved that there was a direct relationship between those. So where did we fail? So we failed, for example, in making some of these changes to have continuity between administrations. So my office doesn't exist anymore in Argentina, for example. So there's no one agency in charge of continuing a general and joint strategy, which I think is a problem in many countries. We failed also in addressing the problem that we couldn't lower the amount of people being detained for having small amount of drugs or consuming on the streets, and that was also a problem that we failed to address in a good manner. And I think the other thing that we could have done even better was to raise the quality of some police forces in Argentina. So you have large differences between different police forces, provincial police forces, and we weren't able to level the quality of those police forces.
Thank you, Martin, for a very comprehensive answer there. So to summarize, what you're saying is when you left, it all went downhill. Is that correct?
Those are your words, Kit.
I feel much the same about the National Crime Agency. If I may, I am joking, obviously. They're probably better off without me, to be honest. Dr. Diarella, if I may, second question for you then. Regarding the US-Mexico relations, what opportunities are there to link up security resources, and how can other countries such as the UK contribute in security cooperation?
Thanks. Well, the US-Mexican relation is very strong. And I guess one of the best things that had happened in recent years is that Mexico and the US resumed the high-level security dialogue. So there was a bridge between 2016 and 2021. But in October, I think 2021, we had another security dialogue in the high-level area. So for starters, that's like one of the first steps that had resumed in terms of the collaboration. Not that there was no collaboration before. So at some point, when we observe international collaboration in terms of security, we forget that even though the news don't announce anything, security agencies are still working together. So even though there was no high-level security dialogues between these years, it doesn't mean that the Mexican authorities and the US authorities were not collaborating together. So one of the steps that are being taken forward that are going to help the international, the bilateral relation and the security across borders has to do with the bicentennial agreement or the bicentennial framework. So this new framework has a focus on human security and the way people need a context and human security to be able to get away in terms of insecurity activities, such as criminal activities. One of the things we really need to understand, and that we as a community of countries could look forward, not only between Mexico and the US, but between the regions in Latin America and the partners outside, it has to do with understanding how criminal organizations evolve and had been evolving since the beginning. In Mexico in particular, we're still talking about cartels and how cartels are conquering different parts of Mexico and they rule different states of Mexico. And one of the realities is that the cartels had been fragmenting for the past 12 years. So what was truth in 2006 is no longer current nowadays. One of the examples I can give you about this point is a relation between the 'Ndrangheta, the Italian mafia, and the Mexican Gulf cartel. So in 2008, there was an announcement made by the US-Italian government of Operación Solare that documented the relation between the 'Ndrangheta and the Gulf cartel for cocaine trafficking. And for several years after that, the Italian government kept publishing about this relation as it was true. What they or the international community didn't observe was that the Mexican government put a huge effort to counter the Gulf cartel. So by 2011, 2012, the Gulf cartel was dismantled. It was dismantled into small pieces. And the Gulf cartel was not as powerful and has not been as powerful since. But still talking about the cartels is actually helping the cartels to gain power over the population. So one of the things that we could engage as a community of countries, not only between the US and the Mexican relation, is to take that power away. If the cartel or a criminal organization goes to society and says like, oh, I am the cartel, you need to give me money. We have created such a collective imagination about what the cartel means in terms of terror, in terms of assassinations, that the society feels horror when someone like that comes and asks for money. So they feel threatened, they feel insecure, so they will comply in most of the cases. So taking the cartel name away, reframing it as the small criminal organizations, serious criminal organizations that they are in some cases, would take some of the power away and will give the society power to respond. And in terms of what can the UK, for example, do with Mexico for cooperation, I would say communication is key. So you can find or you can sign agreements of cooperation, but an agreement, a piece of paper, means nothing if you don't know your contacts. So the different ministries, the different agencies in the UK, well, I guess they're in constant communication with the Mexican authorities. So increasing that communication, knowing the people in charge, is the key for a better understanding and to be able to improve the security in the region further. I understand, as Martin said, that one of the challenges is that as the administrations change, people change. And sometimes it's not even about the administration. As the secretary changes, and this change every 1-2 years, all the people change, so your contacts will change. However, if you keep talking, as the US and Mexican relation has happened, eventually you know the players and you know most of the people. So even though your friend or your contact is not in that position, he will be in the position to say, hey, I am not there, but this is the person you can communicate with. So I said at that point that communication between different departments is the key for advancing security in the region.
Thank you very much. And it won't come as any surprise as the next international liaison officer that I totally support any form of international cooperation. You can't work in isolation, and we've seen that in practice just on our recent visit. Last question before I then open up to questions from the floor. And possibly online if we've got a link. But Antonio, who's been waiting very patiently to receive his last question. In view of the popularity of militarizing police efforts in the region, what lessons do we draw from the Brazilian case, please?
Well, unfortunately, there is a very long list of lessons and a very long period of lesson learning in terms of using militarized security policies in Brazil, which despite significant and I think pretty much unanimous expert and academic evidence and conclusion that these types of policies are counterproductive and they actually trigger violence and encourage violence. It continues to be popular not only in Brazil, in several Latin American countries. So I would summarize the lessons as follows. One is that, as Martin said, in the case of Argentina, that there is a problem of Brazil being divided in several states, and each state controls its own military police and controls its civil police. The federal government, not the federal government, but at the federal level, we have the federal police, which is perhaps the only body in Brazil that looks at organized crime in a coordinated fashion throughout the states, independent of which state it is, and the transnational aspect. But it is one body, one organization, and organized crime in Brazil, as we all know, is enormous. So there is a problem of coordination there. And as you said, urban violence in Brazil, especially in Rio, and now increasingly the northeast of the country due to the expansion of organized criminal groups and drug consumption to the northeast and north of Brazil, is not only big problem, but it is an extreme example, even within Latin America, of the type of armament, of disposition towards violence, of challenging the state and law enforcement institutions directly and controlling some urban spaces. And despite all that, amazingly, we haven't seen really the recent democratic period in Brazil since the military regime to really try to assume a more proactive role in countering organized crime. Of course, there is a lot of rhetoric, especially from the former, the previous administration of Bolsonaro, which, by the way, did very little in terms of public security other than encouraging gun ownership. First of all, there is no appetite for police reform, and there is a need for police reform to try to standardize methods and training, and especially when it comes to human rights and the approach to the population. And second, there is, and as I hinted at my previous answer, there's a consistent practice of considering public security as a criminal justice problem, which it partly is, but with the exception of a very brief period a few years ago, the security secretariat of the federal government is within the justice ministry. Being within the justice ministry is that old saying in English that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when the star minister of public security and justice of the Bolsonaro administration at the beginning, of course, Judge Sergio Moro from the car wash investigations fame, did his anti-crime package of legislation, it was a criminal justice reform, of reforming the court procedures, the types of evidence, and all of that. There isn't that, and there hasn't been for quite a while, this understanding of public security as a problem of political governance in human spaces, of human security. Again, despite overwhelming expert evidence to that sense. So I think that we in the academic and civil society communities need to continue to make this point and perhaps try to reach the federal levels of the need for a more federal bureaucratic system to coordinate these things. And Martin's examples from Argentina, are inspiring in that sense. I fear that nothing in Brazil has happened in that sense at the federal level recently. However, I don't want to end in a very negative, pessimistic point, but so good examples and good lessons from the local and regional level. And I think therein lies the best hope, the best examples of policies that emerge sometimes from the city administrations, the municipalities, sometimes from the regional government. One famous example that actually some people think is a negative example, but I think is cautiously positive, is the pacification strategy in Rio de Janeiro, which consists of combining public services and social development in low-income areas with police presence. It degenerated into something more militarized after that we can discuss. But I think that there is a key insight, and that has been replicated in other Brazilian cities with more success. There is an important insight that experience showed us, that is this combination of a more security component, yes, that needs to be there sometimes, and the governance and political, local politics of governing, of providing this social contract between the state and the local population that needs to be there as well, and is actually at the core of everything.
Thank you very much, Antonio. The root causes are quite complex, and therefore the solutions need to be involved and complex as well. And sometimes they can be a bit simplistic in the frame of dealing with organised crime. Now's your opportunity to ask questions. Gentleman here was Eve was off the block straight away with a question. So if there's a particular person that you would like to ask the question to, then please also indicate, and please do reintroduce yourself.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you. Ewan Grant, former HM Customs and Excise intelligence analyst for TNOC and the ex-Soviet states. Worked for several years in European Union programs in Ukraine, and they were not exemplars of good governance, and they missed warning sign after warning sign after warning sign. My question for all of you is based on a number of comments the panel have made, particularly regarding Venezuela and the tri-border area and Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah in South America is not just a law enforcement problem, it's a geopolitical problem. So my question is this: have you ever heard law enforcement personnel in your countries or from partner countries make any reference to the arrival of and the significance of Wagner in South America? And I would point out, Wagner has been in Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa for a lot longer than people think, because we're looking at high geopolitics and potentially hostage taking against law enforcement action. I'd be interested in your view. This is big stuff, and I think it's been missed or only looked at tactically. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. We don't have to answer these in order, so if anyone wants to jump in first, please do. Or not.
Everyone is looking at me, but I don't. I personally don't have knowledge of Wagner group in Latin America, South America. I am, yes, aware of its significant footprint in Africa and including Lusophone countries, but no, I don't know it in South America. Sorry.
Neither do I, but I can tell you something. There was an airplane, and a 747 that has been seized in Argentina 3 months ago. This was a 747 that was formerly Iranian, but was acquired by Venezuela, and it was being flown by Iranian Revolutionary Guards over the region. It was in the end seized in Buenos Aires, but that same airplane made several travels to Moscow and to Iran. So even though I personally don't have any information about that, it wouldn't surprise me that it would cost them nothing to operate in the area. I mean, the enablers are already there. So when we think about security, and this is something important, I would like the room to, in a way, to follow me in this. We don't have I don't see, in a way, two different worlds in terms of international security and domestic security. These are totally interconnected worlds, and we have to understand this if we want to tackle some of the largest challenges we have in terms of security. We have to understand that security is one, so you don't have domestic security, police matters, and you have international security and nuclear missiles. All of these worlds are interconnected today and right now. So when you think about some of these cases, you see how even powers, even in power struggle, some of these powers are using organized crime as a proxy to operate in several regions in America. So that would be my answer to your question.
Maybe I can also just add to the case of Venezuela. As you say, I mean, it's of course something where the local, the national, the transnational, the global interlinks, and we know of the role of Cuba, of China, of Iran, of Russia in Venezuela as well. So we know that there has been presence of, I would call it, Russian armed individuals in Venezuela. And we know that there are strong links. We know also that in the past, the Russian mafia was involved in trafficking across that border. So it would be plausible to have something like that as well.
And just to add for that, on how can we identify when or if that's happening, it would be really important to observe the migrant caravans So migrants are not criminals. They are fleeing their countries because they feel extremely unsafe. However, some people is using the migrant caravans to transport themselves or to walk along with them and get able to enter different countries. We need, as Martin said, the international security affects national security and vice versa. When Brazil changed their visas policies to Africa, to different countries, that affected the entire region. Migrants are coming in Brazil, where you don't need a visa, and then they go on foot to the rest of Latin America, North Mexico, and then trying to get to the United States. So even in the southern border of Mexico, sometimes in the caravans, you can receive migrants that don't come from Latin America, they come from Africa, they come from Middle Eastern countries. And in some cases, they're trying to reach a better life, a safer life, but in some others, they may or may not have good intentions. So that would be easy to spot if that was the case. We need to be observing the caravans.
Hi, thank you very much for the panel. My name is Eduardo Arcos, Senior Analyst for the Americas at Control Risks. And my question is for Dr. Violeta Islas. If we check out the balance in terms of security of the AMLO administration, I think that there are some positive things in terms of, for example, murders, other types of crimes as kidnaps, kind of either plateauing or going slightly down, although at very high overall rates still. But also, when you look at other indicators in terms of combating organized crime, you see that there has been a marked decline, for example, in seizures of illegal drugs being transported. You see also a marked decline, for example, in the arrest or prosecution of kingpins of organized criminal groups when you compare with similar periods in previous administrations. So are these results, in your opinion, more of a reflection of a less confrontational strategy when it comes to organized crime rather than institutional improvements or improvements in just combating this? And also related to this, what do you think are the prospects of more progressive policy making when it comes to combating organized crime in the remainder of the AMLO administration? Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Sorry, could you repeat the last question again, please?
Yeah, sure. What do you think are the prospects of more kind of progressive policy making when it comes to approaching, combating organized crime, either drug trafficking, drug consumption, in the remainder of the AMLO administration?
Okay, well, I'll get to the first question. In terms of what we observe, you mentioned that yes, violence is going down. We can't expect a sharp drop, and even if we did, we need to be really worried about it, because when you have a sharp drop, that usually means that you're going to have a sharp going up again. So first, violence didn't took 2 years to get to the point where it is. It's been a constant rise to the point where we are. So even a minimum drop it can be taken as a victory in this point, and we can expect that. We've seen it for 2 years in a row. In terms of what we observe for combating crime, this government, as I observe it, has reshaped the policy, and it understands that you cannot have peace without development. So one of the major changes in this administration has been the focus to development. So even when you don't see the work of intelligence, for example, you're not supposed to see it. If you're announcing what intelligence is doing, then the criminals know what you're doing. And then where is your intelligence advantage? So yes, there being work from the police trying to take away drugs from the streets, but at the same time, if you take drugs away, those of you who have worked in law enforcement, how much of that drug is really important in terms of the amount of drug that is being trafficked? You may take 5 kilograms, then that would mean that there's thousands of kilograms going through. So taking away the drugs may or may not impact the real market, because the fact that you take away drugs will not make a change in the decision of people in other parts that are consuming that drug. The availability will not shape the decision of doing it. It will shape the product they are using for their purpose. So on that regard, there is very important advancements between Mexican and the US governments that are trying to tackle the decision or the drug addiction problem or the drug addiction dilemma, let's call it like that. So that would also answer for the prospective question. Now that we're reshaping the security policy to include human security, to include development, and to consider that crime in many cases is not for choice, but it is about trying to survive. If we observe the different salaries in the region, we will know that a municipal police is earning about 300 or less than 300 pounds per month. If he wants to give his family a decent life, or if you have a child with a disease or a mom with cancer, then you need money to be able to provide health. So in this case, the addition of development and human security to the security strategy has been pivotal to the changes, and the results we're going to be observing them, fortunately, in the next years.
May I thank you very much, and thank you for your question. Obviously, I don't want to stifle anyone saying anything that they want to say, but I'm trying to get around to as many questions as possible. So if you want to add something, then please do. If not, we can move on to the next question. Entirely up to you yourselves. Happy?
No, I would like to add that there's one question that we haven't addressed still now, which is how do we define victory? Because we have heard many times, the failure in the war against drugs and everything, but very rarely I have seen or read the definition of victory in this fight. So in my own opinion, victory is the containment of the problem. Obviously, the final solution comes from the demand arena, from the demand side of a problem. So we are discussing security here, and I think security is in charge of containing the problem until the real solutions come. But we have to remember that, because if not, we are continuously thinking we're failing over and over again, and that's not true. I mean, when we see the effort that law enforcement agencies do and governments do, there is a lot that is being, in a way, avoided and prevented through that work, And this is very important when this was very important when I spoke to law enforcement officers, because if not, even they start to buy the idea that they are failing, they're working for nothing. And I totally think that is not true.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, now I feel like I have to react to that. I would say that it's the wrong question to ask, how do we define victory? Because victory itself is already the militaristic war narrative on we are fighting a war. So last year we published a book on transforming the war on drugs together with Juan Carlos Vergara, where we argue we need to change, well, starting with that kind of speech, right, with a narrative. We really need to look at outcomes rather than outputs. So instead of counting how many kilos of drugs we have seized or what the interdiction measures are, we really need to think about what is it that we want to achieve, what should that outcome be, and have perhaps also often more qualitative indicators and not just the output measures. So looking at the transformative end in terms of policies rather than the coercive end, which of course is necessary as well. But as was mentioned before, there's also a public health discussion here, one around sustainable development, respect for human rights, obviously. So if we don't have that as part of the bigger picture, I think we'll never achieve the outcome that we want to have, which should not just be measured in terms of a victory or numbers, but really in terms of what do we do to reduce the violence that results from drug trafficking, but also, of course, drug addiction. So starting here in the UK, in Western Europe, in the US, in terms of thinking about how to frame the discussion differently with the demand, the market, I think that is a very important step.
Yeah, good point. Antonio?
Well, now I have, but
It's back fast.
just very quickly, because I think there's a crucial element of the victory point that has been made. I think increasingly among the expert community, the media, and the policymaking, more importantly, community as well, victory has to some extent been local. And local doesn't mean that it's small, it can be scaled up. So there are a number of, as I said, of positive, very positive cases from cities in Latin America. We have a classic one is Medellin, Colombia, which to some extent has resulted from a game truce. But anyway, there were very positive urbanistic and urban spatial dynamics. And in Brazil, where you see, it's the country with the highest absolute number of homicides in the world, but you do see cities that have reduced dramatically their violence through policies that started at the local level by combining these developmental and territorial governance sort of approaches. And I think victory, one thing I wanted to add is that drug apprehension of drugs and, in terms of volumes, there is no evidence that improves security. In fact, there is significant evidence that increases violence. So if we're looking at the strategic level, drug apprehension is not necessarily a necessary sort of indicator, yes. And victory, in my mind, looks like violence reduction. I think that's the type of victory that, at the moment, we're looking at.
Just wasted 32 years in law enforcement. Thank you. I do agree with you, though, by the way. So, gentlemen. I think we can, yeah.
I mean,
No?
Well,
yeah,
yes,
but
You're
but
close
look
enough
them.
to hear.
Hi, my name is Awais Rajput and I'm a defense and security studies researcher. Today, I want to just focus on A-class drugs and again, South America. It's a design and delivery question. So far, seriously, how we put the effort in to give the farmers, those who cultivate those crops which end up with the cocaine, to provide them alternate which they can make same type of margin of profit, so they can stop to cultivate those crops. And if I see from inductive approach, bottom to top approach, that question, there is total failure. But if I see from top to bottom, Whitehall or White House or decision makers prospective point of view, everything is okay. But my question to the whole panel, how we can do something productive, and if we done some serious efforts to provide those farmers alternative, what we done so far, and if somehow we failed, so why we failed?
Okay, I know you'd like to ask the entire panel. I think because of time, we might have to ask just one person to respond and then a different person to respond to the next question, because we've got a few more that I would like to give the opportunity, if you wouldn't mind. So would you like to take this one? Yeah.
Sure, I can give a quick answer and then
Yeah,
we can
thank you.
move on to others. So I think one problem with the crop substitution is that often the responses are not holistic enough. So you can give a farmer a different type of crop instead of coca, for example, but that doesn't help if there is no road to bring then the product to the market, if there's no electricity to store that. So oftentimes the farmers, they prefer to cultivate coca because they know a so-called financier, someone who's basically buying the coca leaves to then bring them to the laboratory to process them, will just come to the farm, which makes it much easier, because in a situation where you don't have roads to go somewhere else, or where in the rain season it's all just landslides, that won't help. So the problem about the existing policies oftentimes is that they are just not thought through well enough in terms of the entire environment, or some sort of system thinking, if you want, because the infrastructure is missing, because investment in just basic development is missing as well. So it's more about thinking through those policies holistically rather than just thinking specifically about the type of crop, I would say.
Please use the lunch break to ask the replies from the other colleagues. I'm sure they would like to share it. Please.
A question for Dr. Islas.
Yeah.
What is the government doing to tackle three specific areas of crime? The interference of organized crime in the elections, which was very visible in 2021 in Sinaloa, Sonora, Michoacán, etc. Secondly, what is its policy towards the reduction of feminicides, which is a terrible problem? And thirdly, the murder of journalists. Thank you.
Just
Is that all? Right. Easy. No. Well, in terms of interference with the elections, we observe a very large problem since the 2018 election. So the government has developed a special group in charge of electoral violence. So I know for a fact that the group, I mean, it's been developed. It was created about 2021 for the election of 2021. And we observe different cases. For one part, there is different types of violence in terms of electoral violence. So part of knowing how to tackle a phenomena is first understanding what is happening. So there is violence between criminal groups against people in that wants public charges. There is violence between politic groups, and there is also violence between civilians, which are not necessarily criminal groups, or against different politicians. So that's one part of the phenomena. There's been different strategies, including red line, to be able to call, and then the case gets investigated. And so there are different policies put into place that we can talk about it further later, because for the sake of time. The second question, feminicides, we are actually tackling in different fronts, or by we, I mean Mexico, not me, sorry. But one of the fronts is to better the understanding of the public personnel in terms of what gender equality is. So for that, there's been a lot of courses and education that all the public servants need to take. The second part is the security ministry has a gender agenda, sorry, and it was created, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019 and 2020. Now it's starting to work towards that policy. And well, that's been trying to be deployed in terms of the rest of the governments, municipal and local. Now that we have recognized feminicide as a crime, then we need to implement it in all of the offices, in all of the PMs in Mexico. And then the journalist side, well, it has to do with civilians, really. Journalists are exposed because of their work, but they are still civilians. So it has to do with what they do, but also to the fact that they have no protection. So in terms of that, when we, in terms of security community, when we manage to reduce violence, the journalists' crimes are going to be reduced. And this has to do specifically with the fact that journalists are the one informing the people. So if you are an organized criminal organization, you want to control information in order to legitimize your activities in the population and to create terror. And that is why reducing the power or the imagination of what organized criminals are is so important, to reduce their power and to be able to reduce their way of attacking civilians, including journalists.
Thank you very much for your answer. I'm going to squeeze in one last question because the lady at the back has been waiting very patiently.
Pressure at all asking the last question before lunch or anything. Given that transnational organized crime has in many cases surpassed the capacities of the states in Latin America, might including other actors, I'm thinking of the private sector, mayors, municipalities, in a more meaningful way, perhaps engaging directly city to city or company to company, yield better results than continuing to work this as a national problem? And can you maybe suggest some examples of success? Thank you.
1 minute each, all of you, if you can, if you can, please.
Thank you for that question. I loved it. Thank you. Yes. Well, I can go on for much longer than 1 minute on this, but yes, I think there is already substantive understanding and awareness of the need to diversify the types of political actors that deal with transnational organized crime and national organized crime. Mayors and local level administrations are, starting to get into the picture, and the examples I cited are, for instance, Belo Horizonte in Minas Gerais, state in Brazil, Medellin, Rio to some extent in the past, not so much now, Ciudad Juarez. I think those are examples of cities that have had initiative and have been able to share their experiences through some networks. However, we find it difficult. I think they've hit a wall in in terms of the regional cooperation frameworks that are entirely structured around national governments. I think that there should be a space, but that's a little bit of like blue ocean thinking, like including local level actors, even if they are in a network fashion, such as inviting a representative from the National Association of Cities or from one of the international outlets of mayors and C40s of this world to the table in some of these regional discussions on security and law enforcement and increasing cooperation between police and local governments.
Thank you. That was a Caribbean minute, most definitely. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yes, I think including the mayors is highly important for security strategies, specifically understanding that the difference in political parties in the different local and municipal and the federal governments are one of the main reasons for the failure in terms of the implementation of security strategies. So one of the things that needs to happen if we are to succeed in any range, we really need to understand, not only as the research area or as academia, but also in the different government areas, that we're all working towards the same end, whether we're researchers or politicians, or if you're one party or the other one. The focus needs to go back to securing the nations and the people and human security. So in that point, sometimes what would help is confrontational speech. So it's not us from one party against you from the other party. Is we together, or all of us together, research community, politicians, etc., working towards security. So in that point, yes, I celebrate that question. And I guess, yeah, that's one of the most important and imperative points that we need to work on for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, in my case, I think cybersecurity is actually leading the example on how the private sector may play a vital role in fighting against organized crime. And that would be the example in which you could mount to build a stronger partnership between the public and the private sector. For example, tackling companies that may supply precursor chemicals would be vital to stop and to affect the logistic chain of drug trafficking.
Thank you, Martin.
Well, I would add that, first of all, similar to those who respond to organized crime, also the phenomenon itself, we need to look at a little bit more holistically. So it's not just transnational organized crime, often that is intertwined with migration flows, with armed conflict. So even that needs to be seen in a bigger picture. And then in terms of those who respond, I would just add here civil society as well. There are a lot of initiatives done, for example, across the Colombian-Venezuelan border, the Colombian-Ecuadorian border, where civil society organizations have developed early warning systems to share information in terms of where an organized group might be, where they might be exploiting others. So those initiatives need to be supported, I would say. And then, of course, there is a role for everyone to play, also from my end in academia. So we, for example, we organize with the Global Security Program regular cross-stakeholder fora, where we bring together academia and government and international community and the civil society to discuss these issues, because often it's also a problem of mistrust. People would not share information with the police or with the military because of issues of corruption. So just bridging that mistrust is important, bringing all the different types of stakeholders together to understand that we can work together.
Thank you very much. Can I just thank Antonio, Dr. Diarella, Martin, Dr. Annette, for sharing your experience and your knowledge and your thoughts with us, and for you for listening and for your questions as well. Thank you very much. I think lunch is now beckoning. Okay.